So, after finally deciding to give Sekiro a chance, while never having played any other From Software game, I have to say it is now easily one of my favorites. And a big part of that is how cool the bosses are. Well, some more than others. So, to pay homage to such a masterpiece, I wanted to rank all the bosses from worst to best. But words like worst and best are so subjective, and I wasn't even sure how I was going to differentiate between certain bosses when trying to make the list. So to solve this, I created a system. I gave every boss a score from 1 to 5 in 5 different categories that I feel make up an amazing boss fight, and then I averaged the scores. So my 5 categories include, first and foremost, difficulty, fairness, atmosphere, the arena itself, and the last one for me is the moveset variety. Just to be clear, for this list I'm not including any cheese strategies when evaluating these fights. I'm assuming for all of these that it's a straight head-to-head normal fight. I will only be ranking the main bosses in Sekiro. How I decided on that is pretty easy, it's just any boss that provides you a memory after beating him. So with all that being said, I will remind you that this is my subjective opinion, and I'm honestly curious to see what other people think, so please feel free to let me know what your list would be or where you disagree with mine. This really should go without saying, but there are multiple story spoilers ahead. Okay, so I feel like I've framed the video properly. I will now proceed with delineating my rankings of all the bosses in Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, from worst to best. Now, this one's kind of tough, because it's a puzzle-based boss fight. It's not a traditional, like, actually fighting, trying to kill him type thing. It's figuring out the puzzle, setting traps, trying to lure the monkeys into the traps, and then killing them. There's not really a threat of them killing you, with the exception of those stupid little terror monkeys, and that's more annoying than anything else. Now, you do have kind of a cool arena being on the rooftops of the pagodas, but that's really all this has going for it. I mean, I like the play on the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil monkeys, that's kind of cool, but it doesn't even really count as a boss fight. It's pretty straightforward, and particularly once you figure out the puzzle, the replayability is kind of shot because you know how to do it immediately from there on out. Overall, this was the most boring, the lamest boss to me in the entire game, hence it is at the bottom of my list. Now this fight could have been kind of cool, but the arena is what really did it in for me. I get that FromSoft likes to make you fight 2 bosses at once, that's kind of their thing. However, this fight takes place in this cramped ass little cave, but at the same time has no obstacles in the middle in order to separate the 2 apes long enough to do some damage on one before attacking the other. It turns out you have to bait the Headless Ape's AoE terror scream in order to keep him stationary long enough to deal with his old lady. It took me longer than I'd like to admit for me to realize this. So the arena sucks because it's too small with 2 enemies in it. It has no visual appeal, just a dark cave. And you have the inherent unfairness of 2 enemies with no physical barriers to separate them, even for a moment. Plus, once the old ball and chain is dead, it's just a rehash of the second phase of the Guardian 8 fight, which is a great phase, but it's kind of lazy. Oh man, did I think that this was going to be an epic ass boss fight when I first saw that dragon. I was incorrect. Now, although the atmosphere is pretty cool at first when you first go into the Divine Realm, after you initially see it, it's actually pretty bland. It's kind of just cloud floor and then nothing around the outsides. Now the fight itself, it does have some cool moments. There's no denying that jumping up in the air and shooting lightning down at the dragon is pretty cool. But between having to run all the way to him each time he blows you back, you have to fight your camera to focus on the right tree to grapple to, and the occasional getting hit in midair after already absorbing the lightning, which causes you to fall down and then get shocked before you can even recover. The fight is a slog to say the least. And God help you if you accidentally die and have to go deal with those little useless vomit bastards again, just to restart the fight with the dragon. Visually it's pretty cool, everything else is kind of leaving something to be desired. Now we're getting into the boss fights where there's nothing really wrong with the boss fights per se, but they're just not quite as exceptional as higher up in the list. The False Monk would definitely fall into this category. She's a big spinning purple bitch who requires a lot of deflecting. The good news is, her big sword makes her swinging easier to see usually. The bad news is though, is that some of her swings can be real quick and come from deceptive angles. She'll kind of lull you into getting relaxed and feeling like you have her timing, and then she'll throw a couple real quick slashes that throw you off again. Now she does tank your posture bar pretty quick, but as long as you're not impatient and you manage your posture well, it's a pretty straightforward fight, but it's in a lackluster but serviceable arena. Holy hell, this geriatric bent me over a table and had her way with me more times than I can count on my first playthrough. I went to the Hirata estate pretty early, and she represented my first legitimate challenge. Now on subsequent playthroughs, I really enjoyed her fight, but I hated this bitch on my first go around. She has a relatively large moveset that, once learned, is very satisfying to counter. The arena looks pretty cool considering it's engulfed in flames, but it's a bit narrow, and keeping her centered in the room can be kind of a chore. Also, the pillars were more of a pain in the ass than useful, at least in my experience. However, all in all, it's a really fun boss fight. This is not what I thought the first time I played it though, because I wasn't playing the game right, and she punishes you if you're new and don't know how to play the game properly. I absolutely love this fight with that one guy on the horse. Shit, I forgot his name.
My name is GYOUBU MASATAKA ONIWA! As I breathe!
The atmosphere in this fight is probably my favorite. I love that war-torn battlefield you look over after you scale the wall of ASHINA Castle. You just see this vast, desolate battlefield with bodies littered everywhere. The quiet ambiance invokes not a feeling of dread, but a very somber reverence for what took place. It's not even real, it's a video game, and it still feels like that. The fight itself is a blast too, between GYOUBU's iconic yell, the varied attacks that he has coming in from weird angles because he's the only boss you're fighting where he's on top of a horse with a giant ass spear. I also like the use of the prosthetic grapple for when he gets too much distance from you, you can pull him in tight. Now, it's not the toughest fight by any stretch, but he is a great first boss, with a very satisfying death blow to boot. I'll just say it now. Fuck this boss. I hate this boss, and I had more trouble with her than with any other boss in the game, by far. Now, I'll start with the positives though, to be fair. The Fountainhead Bridge is gorgeous. Okay, that's it for the positives. Now the negatives. First off, the practicality of fighting on that curved bridge with a couple of particular branches that are constantly blocking your camera is absolutely infuriating. Even if you decide you don't want to do that and you go down on one of the flat ends on either side, it's a clusterfuck of pillars and walls that screw up your camera completely. It's impossible to see her. There's no good place to fight her on here. She has some uppercut shit with her sword that clips through the floor and it bonks the shit out of you whether you're blocking or not. It just destroys you. Now, I already had a really hard time keeping her far enough away to accurately read her perilous attacks. I would constantly find myself standing right up against her fupa and trying to Makiri a sweep or jump over her thrust because I was too close. I couldn't read her body language or, her telegraphing of what she was going to be doing. So it was a guessing game, and it was absolutely maddening. Now, at least the second phase can be instant death blow because it's the most annoying thing in the entire game. Having to just swing between the trees until the shadows go away, and then you can keep attacking her, it's really one of the most aggravating parts of it. So, thankfully, you can just skip that. The third phase is just the cherry on top, with that stupid terror vomit she does, and the constant unblockable sweeps. She is difficult as hell, I'll give her that, and the arena is beautiful, which is why this is as high up as it is. But it often feels unfair, and it's a damn shame that a boss fight that looks so amazing can suck so hard. Now, a lot of people can't stand the Demon of Hatred, but I actually like this fight a lot, and again, the atmosphere of the battlefield at night is really cool. Now, he's extremely difficult, I get that, and it requires a lot of attempts to learn his moves, but for me, it almost never felt unfair. Now, the arena has a few trees and terrain that get annoying when you run into them, but overall, it's nice and spacious for fighting this giant fire monkey. Although that may work against some players by enticing them to keep their distance when actually staying close is the key to success. I lost more than a few times, and I actually had to go to bed and come back the next day. But I could feel myself learning and improving with each attempt. And isn't that what you really want from a Sekiro boss? I don't like that it leaned more towards dodging than your typical deflection fights, because I really like the deflection fights. But at the same time, it was kind of a nice change of approach from the typical fights. It kind of varied it up a bit. Despite me distinctly remembering screaming, "That's bullshit!" at my computer more than a few times, I think that stemmed more from the frustration with myself than the unfairness from the demon himself.
I have witnessed Shura once before. The very same stirs inside of you. As such, you must be destroyed.
Okay, so my dumbass accidentally did the Shura route the first time, and the Emma ISSHIN combo kicked my ass repeatedly. Now, I consider Emma part of this since she's basically the first phase of the boss. We'll start with the arena though. The arena at the top of ASHINA Castle is beautiful, especially in this fight with Emma with the sun setting over the land below you. if you actually get the Emma death blow in the right spot, you have the setting sun in the background and it looks really cool. I don't think it's a coincidence that multiple bosses at the top of my list are going to be in this arena. You start with Emma, and she doesn't feel like a frantic or fast-paced fight, but she's very quick, and you have to make sure your deflects are on point. One thing that bugged the hell out of me, though, is that godlike reach she has on her grab attack. You could be like 40 feet away and she'll still get a piece of you and just destroy your health. That shit genuinely pissed me off.
Sure to roam free.
But the real fight here is with Lord ISSHIN. So this guy's first phase isn't that difficult. It does take some time to learn his attack patterns and to carefully figure out the spots where you can whittle his health down enough where a posture break is viable. It's also nice that he can dodge and punish you as well, so being overly aggressive in attacking isn't advisable. That being said though, he has plenty of Ichimonji doubles and thrust attacks that provide plenty of windows for counterattacks. Where this fight really gets intense is with the second phase. ISSHIN starts off with, and periodically uses, this move where he growls at you and then lights the whole place on fire, and then follows that up by slashing whatever health you have left with his crazy combat art move. It took me way too long to realize that I could interrupt his attack with firecrackers and just avoid all of that. But aside from that, he has his repertoire from the first phase, with a couple of added moves thrown in, like a combo with a large fire sweeping slash, and a move where he stomps his foot and launches a line of fire at you. The great thing about this fight is that all of his moves are readable and counterable, but it takes razor focus and not overcommitting to a combo of your own. Big thing for this fight is patience and not hesitating, which ISSHIN tells you himself. When you decide to attack, do it swiftly, and then be prepared to read his attacks. This was definitely one of the most frustrating yet enjoyable fights for me.
Sekiro, it was not to be.
Alright, we are in the top 5. This guy honestly intimidated the shit out of me the first time. He's giant, he's very mobile, and he has sporadic attack patterns that take a while to learn. There's also something about enemies with no sword that really makes deflecting harder for me to get my timing correct on. Now this guy is such a tank that the way I found success was actually by avoiding his attacks instead of deflecting them, and looking for small windows to inflict some damage. Like if you can bait the poop throw attack, you can run under him so it misses you, and then you can use firecrackers to keep him stunned, and you can take a large chunk of his health at a time, particularly if you stagger him. The arena itself is nice and spacious, which is great for an avoid type fight, but I really almost never use those grapple trees, and they just kind of get in the way until the Guardian Ape knocks him down. It's nothing really that spectacular visually either, but overall it's not a bad arena. Even though he's sporadic in his attacks, which is cool because they require a lot of focus to read, there is a leaping grab that he does which seems like a crapshoot as to whether he gets you or not, and I hate that. Now the second phase is cool because his moveset is completely different from the first, and now he has a sword that I feel a lot more comfortable deflecting. However, even with a sword, his attacks are not traditional, and they come from these like weird arm angles and body positions, so it really does change it up still. The second phase is a much more face-to-face fight, pun intended. And on top of that, you're rewarded for good deflecting by him doing his 12-6 big ol' heavy slash that leads to him staggering over if you deflect it. and allows you to use your spear to pull the parasite out of his neck, and it does a ton of posture damage. I absolutely love the second phase of this fight, and the first phase was pretty decent. That, plus how formidable and intimidating he is in presentation, is why this boss cracks my top 5. Okay, so now we are in the cream of the crop bosses. The entire top 4 is extremely challenging and fun, but this is a ranked list and I have to make these decisions. Owl Father is the second time you're fighting Owl, and can only be done by going to the second memory of the Harada estate when doing the purification ending. It takes place in the same arena as Lady Butterfly, which is okay, but can be kind of annoying due to its narrow shape as far as keeping Owl centered and not getting backed against a pillar. Like I had said before, visually it's pretty cool with the fire everywhere, but honestly, after a while, all that orange just makes me feel like I'm fighting in a Home Depot. Now what makes this a cool boss fight is the fight itself. This fight is intense in the best possible way. Because this is the second time fighting him, you go in already knowing some of his combos. But boy howdy does he throw some new stuff your way to keep you on your toes. The big thing about Father Owl is that he's relentless during extended combos, and then he creates distance that allows his posture bar to reset. The combos keep coming, and opportunities to inflict some damage are few and far between. You basically have to weather the storm and be on top of your deflect game, and then you look for certain specific combos that present themselves where you can get 1 or 2 hits in. For example, I know that when he shoulder bumps me and then throws his firecrackers, I can deflect to the side because he's going to do a big slash, and I can get 1 or 2 hits in on his back. So I'm constantly looking for that, and the second I see it start, I know, okay, this is a chance to get a couple of hits in. He even adjusts what he does based on your actions, which I thought is great. Like when he's going for that itchy manji, if you dodge to the side too early, he'll actually punish you for it by turning it into a quick blind backslash. Not only do you have to read his moves with extreme precision, you also have to deal with his use of firecrackers. He will use the firecrackers to cover his moves, such as a perilous thrust that there's almost no way to see coming unless you expect it. So you have to stay alive, stay focused, and you have to take advantage of every opportunity to inflict a small amount of damage, all without being overly aggressive. Once you have his health around halfway or so, his posture bar really doesn't go down, and he gives you so many deflection and carry opportunities that it's pretty straightforward to build his posture bar all the way up and get that first death blow. The second phase is a lot like the first, except the new annoying thing is that after deflecting a bunch of attacks, you finally get a chance to punish and inflict some damage. And the fucker turns into an owl and flies away and you get nothing. Nothing! I don't mind having the mechanic that requires you to deal with him appearing out of nowhere, but losing out on all those opportunities to get some strikes in on him is incredibly annoying and unnecessary. However, with how fast-paced and intense the fight is, I do like the move he has where the owl perches on his arm and then rushes you with a fire trail, followed by an unblockable thrust. It really lets you get a second to kind of catch your breath. And then the move itself is easy to dodge, plus it gives you a free Makiri counter. All that being said, it's an amazing fight, but a couple of minor annoyances keep it from being in the top 3.
Defeated by my own son.
He will risk his life to take me home. For he is my shinobi.
My lord, I have come for you. This will only take a moment. Let's see. For as long as you are alive, the dragon's blood can never be mine.
Genichiro is where everything clicked for me. I struggled my way through the game, dodging, blocking, dying a whole hell of a lot. But fighting Genichiro is where I really learned to utilize my deaths as chances to learn and improve. I realized the importance of deflecting over dodging, of being patient and waiting for good opportunities to strike, of not being overly aggressive and leaving myself vulnerable. There's a lot of great lessons I learned, and they all happened when I fought Genichiro. Let's start with the arena though. The top of Ashina Castle is definitely one of my favorite places to fight. It's big enough to have adequate room to fight, yet not so big that there's not a slight feeling of claustrophobia when being pinned down by a boss. And it looks absolutely amazing, being able to see all of Ashina Castle below you from 3 different sides. During this particular fight, it is somewhat dark and overcast and you have snow piled up on the rooftops. Everything about the setting is great. Now the fight itself is very significant story-wise, being the first real time you're going toe-to-toe with the main antagonist. He presents a great challenge because this fight is relatively early in the story, so newer players haven't yet mastered how to fight. He has a varied moveset that not only includes different sword combos, but also the use of a bow and arrow to keep you honest at range, a perilous grab, and a perilous thrust attack that tests your ability to Mikiri counter. It really demonstrates the importance of closing the gap and keeping the pressure on him, while making sure your deflection game is on point as well. One thing I really liked is that in the first phase, he would do a jump attack that would always be followed by a perilous thrust. However, in the second phase, the jump attack would be followed by either the perilous thrust or a perilous sweep, which I found out the hard way. Because there's a lot of dust that comes up when he lands the jump attack, it was really difficult for me to read his body position to figure out which attack was coming up. And that's when I learned to look for the light glint off the tip of his blade to read what attack was coming next. So even though there was dust everywhere, if I saw the light glint on his left, I knew he was gearing up for the perilous sweep. And if I saw the light glint on his right, or kind of closer to his right anyway, I knew that thrust was coming, and I was able to read it that way. It's these kind of trial and error lessons that this fight teaches you that make it so great. Now, it is pretty difficult on the first playthrough. At least for me, it was somewhat difficult, but it felt fair. I always felt like I was improving, and each time I died, my mindset wasn't, oh, it's bullshit. It was more like, okay, so now I know to look out for that move next time so I can counter it. It really allowed me to change my frame of mind when fighting these bosses. That's when he turns into Wave Tomoe, and the dynamic of the fight changes drastically to match the mood. He has lost his armor and is much looser with his defense, but is more frenzied in his attacks. So it's more important to not overcommit by trying to do too much damage at once, even though you really want to, because you're getting good damage in on each swing. It also introduced lightning counters, which adds another layer to this already varied fight. Being a 3-stage boss also really adds to the rush you feel when you finally beat him and land that final death blow. What an amazing fight from start to finish. I absolutely loved it. I do want to do an honorable mention. On subsequent playthroughs, the opening Genichiro fight is great because not only is it similar to the Ashina Castle one, but also it takes place in that flowing silver grass field, which is fantastic. It allows you to really see how far your skills have come too. Where in the first playthrough you probably got tanked pretty hard by him, that's what it's intended to do, that's where you lose your arm. But now, you can mow through him with ease. It's almost second nature at this point to deflect his attacks, to strike at the right times, to Mikiri his thrust. It's like that scene in The Matrix where Neo's blocking agent punches in slow motion with no effort whatsoever because he's already ascended. that's what you feel like. Anyway, it's not really a boss fight because you don't get a memory and you still lose your arm anyway, but it's definitely worth the honorable mention.
Seems you've grown, if just a little. Have it your way, young wolf.
Okay, as I mentioned previously, my dumbass did the Shura route first. So I had to basically beat half the game twice before I even got to fight the Great Shinobi Owl. And boy was I missing out. This was far and away my favorite fight in the game, all the way up until I got to my actual favorite fight, which I'm sure you've probably figured out by now. To begin with, the fight takes place atop ASHINA Castle again, which is always an amazing locale to duke it out with a boss. What makes this fight so great though is the unique challenge that Al presents. He is physically huge, he takes up a lot of space, especially in that arena that's not that big. And his hits all feel like sledgehammers, even when perfectly deflected. He not only varies his attacks, but also the pace of his attacks. And he finally gives you a taste of your own medicine with those shinobi tools. A lot of the fight, he is constantly pushing the pace, and really testing your ability to read and deflect his attacks. But he also uses finesse with things like his smoke bomb and his anti-heal. There's been times where I'm trying to get a few hits in and I'm already mid-swing before I realize the anti-heal is just floating right in front of me about to get me. And then that's followed up with a relentless flurry of attacks, a backflip off the face, and a shuriken to the dome for my troubles. He's an absolute posture tank, yet the opportunities to inflict damage are few and far between, just like when you fight him at the Harada state. There's a few moves like the shuriken followed by the front flip strike that you can dodge and you get a hit or two in, or you can dodge and sneak a hit when he throws an anti-heal. But I actually had to get creative to get extra hits in or this would take forever. So like I would let him break my posture intentionally so that he would try to stomp me while I'm on the ground and I could roll to avoid it and get a free hit in that way. Then, once you finally made it to the second stage, the whole game changes again. He switches up to, instead of throwing shurikens, he throws poison. It keeps you out of attack range and it limits your ability to keep the fight where you want it to be because the poison kind of lasts a while. Especially if he does a couple of poison throws at once before the other ones have gone away, you're really limited in the amount of area you have to fight. He also will use that poison barrier later in the fight to give him enough time to recover posture if it's high enough. I learned you have to shuriken him to interrupt it, or you're stuck building all that posture back up again. These new wrinkles, added onto the already formidable moveset and pace, make this one hell of an arduous fight, but it's also one of the best in the game.
You taught me well. That's my boy.
This is it. The top of the list. The best boss in the game. And a lot of you guys probably knew that before you even clicked on this video. ISSHIN the Sword Saint is the greatest boss fight I have ever experienced.
Destroy you.
The arena is perfect. A big open field that does nothing to limit you physically. At first, I kind of hated the tall grass because it makes it hard to read the move, especially like a crouch thrust or something where you can't really see the glint off the blade. But then I realized you can move down to the dirt road and completely eliminate that issue. The atmosphere itself is second to none. It's a beautiful flowing field of silver tall grass. I also really enjoyed the narrative implications of ending things in the same place where they began. You have the background weather changing and getting more hectic as the fight progresses. You have that amazing musical score that is different for each phase of the fight, but also matches the increasing intensity. I can't say enough about how perfect the atmosphere of the last fight is. Even little things like the petals on the top of the grass flying off when ISSHIN sweeps his spear or his sword is fantastic. So the first phase is GENICHIRO, and at this point in the game, he's nothing to you. He's got a couple of new Immortal Blade techniques, but you have already learned and overcome him completely. It's a really nice way to round out your progression throughout the game, showing how the guy who once cut off your arm with ease is now nothing more than a speed bump for you. The real show, however, is Sword Saint ISSHIN, looking all sorts of badass with his bathrobe and his samurai helmet. The first phase is pretty easy, honestly, and it's pretty similar to the Lord ISSHIN fight from the Shura route. He's only using a sword, and as long as you can deflect well and read his perilous attacks, you should be able to breeze through it with minimal resistance. Where the fight goes from fun to best in the game, though, is the second phase. This old bastard busts out his giant spear and fights you with both a sword and a spear simultaneously. This is a difficult combo to overcome because the visual speed of the sword swings and the spear swings are vastly different. So you'll have a big lumbering spear coming at you slowly, and then you'll have a sword slash come in super quick, and it really messes with your deflection timing. You have to be hyper focused and you really have to stay on your toes. You're basically fighting two different types of enemies at once. Then, after all that, you're starting to get comfortable with the two weapons. You find out this fucker brought a gun to a sword fight, and he starts popping shots at you that you have to deflect.
Kid Car ain't got nothing on me! Ah!
On top of all of that, he likes to throw in combat arts as well, although I will say that these are pretty easily manageable with the umbrella. Or if you have the right skill, you can also even use these as an opportunity to punish him. The one good thing about the spear being introduced is that the spear perilous thrust is really telegraphed, and it gives you a nice early cue to get ready to Mikiri. But other than that, this phase is fast paced and intense, and ISSHIN has an insane variety of moves, attacks, and even angles that he swings from, which can easily disorient you if you're not hyper focused. Even healing's a bitch because of his speed and his range. I would have to run like half a mile away before I was comfortable doing a healing gourd and then coming back. You will notice though that there are a few familiar combos that you'll recognize if, like me, your dumbass did the Shura route first and you've already seen him. Now last but not least at all is the third phase. I would argue that the third phase is easier because even though the moveset and the weapons are the same as phase 2, ISSHIN starts using lightning. Now if you're able to adequately counter the lightning strikes, you can do a lot of damage to him quickly and end the third phase with a lot more ease than the second. What's so great about the third phase though, is that it represents the end of the marathon. Not only are you almost at the end of this crazy long fight, but you're also almost at the end of the entire journey. As I had already mentioned, the crescendoing intense background music and frequent lightning strikes only help to further this feeling of desperation not to fuck up when victory is so close. Your heart's absolutely pounding. It takes everything in you to calm yourself down and really focus on each and every attack from a calm state where you can make rational decisions on how to counter. It's honestly easy to let yourself get overwhelmed and think, oh, I'm almost there, and maybe get a little selfish and take some extra swings or not read a move correctly. It's the mental aspect of the third phase is the coolest part. So, even though the second phase is more difficult technically, the third phase is the most enjoyable. It's being the culmination of all your efforts. And the cherry on top of this awesome boss Sunday is that when you finally beat this geezer and you get that final death blow, it's really cool how they have him somberly drop to his knees and accept his defeat with honor. He even encourages you to do it.
Do it!
And when the immortal blade slices through his back, he congratulates you on a job well done, and you bid him farewell as an old friend.
Sekiro, farewell.
This mutual respect shown at the end of this fantastic fight, at the end of this fantastic game, just left me with the biggest smile on my face. And honestly, I felt a little depressed that I knew I would never experience that for the first time again. I truly think that ISSHIN the Sword Saint is the best boss I have ever fought in any game I've played. And if you haven't played Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, then A, what the fuck are you doing watching a spoiler video, and B, go buy it and play it now. This is not one of those games, should I buy it? I'm not really into FromSoft games. This game is fantastic. If you like single player games, you need to play this 100%. Please take that advice from someone who had never played a Soulsborne game in their life. Sekiro is something special. So that's my ranking of all the Sekiro bosses from worst to best. I really want to know where you guys agree and disagree with me, so please make sure to let me know. Also, let me know if you like the ranking video format. It was actually kind of a blast to make, so if you guys like it, I could definitely do some other rankings for other games in the future. Anyway, that's it. Go play Sekiro. Thank me later.